Hello and welcome to Erie Now. I'm your host, Cindy Patton. Erie Now is a WQLN current events discussion program. It's based on the Erie Community Foundation's Erie Vital Signs, which tracks indicators that measure Erie County's well-being in 8 different topics. Erie Now presents each of these topics in the hopes of further educating and perhaps inspiring our viewers to take some action in their communities. There are obviously many issues that affect communities right here in northwestern Pennsylvania. Today, we will take a closer look at community and civic engagement. According to Erie Vital Signs, both voting and community volunteerism are down in northwestern Pennsylvania. First, we will discuss voter participation, which has fallen below the state and national levels for the first time in more than 10 years. We talked with Dr. David Kozak, a political science professor at Gannon University, about this trend and what can be done to improve voting in the community.
We have this machine of incumbents. People have their own base of support. They have enormous advantages, incumbents do, in name recognition. And I think that makes it a little less competitive. And when it's less competitive, people realize it's only civic duty that would bring them to the polls, that they don't have much of a role. So the normal spurs to political participation, in competitiveness, tightness, mobilized organizations, political parties that try to get the vote out. A lot of that isn't working the way it used to in this era of the machine of incumbents. I think, stronger political parties would probably get it up, taking more effort to take people to the polls, more effort to get people registered. Those are all admirable efforts that I think we ought to engage in. And particularly, Erie County has the potential, Erie County, Pennsylvania, has the potential to be truly purple, where, either side could win. And so in that kind of structure of competition, anything we do to encourage people to vote, anything we do to say, your vote can make a difference and is worthwhile. Anything along those lines really is healthy for democracy.
So Dr. Kozak has set the stage, and now to further explore this issue, here is our panel for today. Erie County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper took office in January of this year and also has served as United States Congresswoman for the 3rd District of Pennsylvania. Our panel also includes 3 area journalists who will bring their experience and their knowledge to today's topics. Lisa Adams is a reporter and anchor for Lilly Broadcasting Company. Ben Spagan is the managing editor for the Erie Reader magazine and WQLN radio host of Weekends All Things Erie. And we're joined by Jeff Pinsky, a retired journalist who worked at the Erie Times for years and an associate director of public relations and marketing at Edinboro University of Pennsylvania. So welcome, everyone. Let's discuss the importance of voting in our community, and perhaps we will start with you, Kathy. And what do you think, compared to state and national averages, we're down with voters here? Why aren't people getting out to vote?
I think one of the big reasons is people don't feel engaged in the elections because they don't feel their vote's going to make a difference. We have many elections in our region that are where someone's unopposed, so they feel that it's already decided, and why do they need to go out to the polls? I believe that gerrymandering, where the politicians pick their voters versus the voters picking their elected officials, has a huge piece in this also. The congressional district has now been divided, Erie County has now been divided into 2 different congressional districts with both representatives living far away from Erie, and people feel it doesn't really make a difference whether they get out and vote for that seat either. So I think there's a number of factors, but the voters, I just don't think that they feel that their vote is really going to help decide what happens in these elections.
County Executive, it's no secret that you had an interesting strategy when you ran the last time around. You decided to focus your efforts on those voters who had a history of turning out at the polls. And while that was successful for you, it's kind of sad to think that you wouldn't want to get the other people out there to the polls. And 19% turnout in the primary this year is ridiculously low.
Well, when you're running and you have limited resources to run, you have to figure out where you're going to target those funds and the people that you have working for you. And because the voter participation is so low, you do tend to go right to those people who you know, particularly on a midterm election such as this, those people who are your super voters, the ones that come out year after year and vote. And so you target those individuals, unfortunately, you know, and even with your mailings, and you only have so much money to go around, so you target those voters.
I think those super voters, in many cases, are longtime voters, senior citizens, the folks from the greatest generation, and maybe the generation after that, who believe it to be almost a sacred duty and a right to vote. Somehow the succeeding generations seem to get away from that. And there's probably a lot of reasons involved in that. One of them, far be it for me to agree with an elected official, but I certainly agree with the gerrymandering, which is absolutely horrific at the state level. We see it here. We see that with the state representatives, and of course at the congressional level, that nobody knows who their congressperson is, basically. But to get back to why we're not voting, we see a vitriol that we've seen for maybe 10 years or so, and you see this by following the letters to the editor. My last years at the newspaper, I saw a vitriol content that was not just disagreement by political parties, it was almost a religion kind of actual hatred of people who had a different view than you. And I think those are turn-off things. Mm-hmm. We have two candidates for governor right now who are coming up in this election who are on TV calling each other liars, mm-hmm. and also lying themselves at the time. People see this and they just throw up their arms and say, why should I be a part of that?
But it's interesting with the contested election, the presidential election in 2000. I mean, the spike, the highest voting levels came in 2004 because I think people were engaged by all that discussion about whether the election was fair, whether the outcome was fair, and I think they thought, yeah, I need to get involved in making sure the right thing happens the next time around. So that's very interesting that that was the peak, and after that things have fallen off.
I think that was part of what Dr. Kozak said, where you have to get the competitive nature of what's going on.
Exactly.
And also a point that you had made, Kathy, where why does my vote count if we don't have anybody that's even competing for it?
That's what I was going to say. On a local level, you know, we're lower than the national rates, and Dr. Kozak spoke to the advantages that incumbents have. Our last mayoral race featured no challengers in the primary, and then a write-in candidate just weeks before the election. And so, do we think it's, you know, the number of candidates that's a problem for us, or maybe even the strength and quality of politicians in our area that just doesn't bring voters out to the polls?
Well, I think it's some of both of that. You know, no matter who runs, I always try to thank them for running, because if we don't have people running, then it's not a democracy. If we just have incumbents year after year going out there and being unchallenged. And I think that is something that's very difficult for people, because as someone who's run for election, you put your life, your whole history out there for people to dissect and criticize. As Jeff said, the vitriol that's out there against anyone who's in elected office is very difficult for most people to handle. So I think it's hard to get candidates, serious candidates out there running, and then the voters look at that and say, well, I don't have a choice. There's only one person running, or it's a weak candidate against the incumbent.
I might take a different stance, at least in the gubernatorial election this time around. I don't find the current ad campaigns vitriolic. I find them creative and witty and engaging, and I feel like if people are on the sidelines in this very important race, I mean, I feel like the candidates are putting their views on issues out there in interesting and creative ways, and they're not attacking each other as people or individuals. So I see their bantering back and forth as focused on the issues of education funding and of the extraction tax concept. I mean, I think there's been some interesting engagement in that race. And we heard, you know, after so much of an effort to engage younger voters and the advantage of social media in reaching them, I'd like to know why that isn't working.
I would say one thing, though, on the gubernatorial race, we can't hardly get them to Erie. You know, they concentrate on Philadelphia and the counties around Philadelphia, and they concentrate on Pittsburgh. And the rest of the state doesn't get a lot of attention. And people want to meet the candidates. They want to at least have some connection to them. And I think getting both the governor and Tom Wolf up here more would help to engage the voters.
Well, I think what some of the other states are doing, that Pennsylvania is not doing. If you look at the states that have, the national average is around 50% turnout. If you look at the states that are above 50% or close to 60% or even beyond, they're the Midwestern states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, going out to Alaska, South Dakota, even Maine. And if you look at the elections in those states, they're well, number one, competitive, as Dr. Kozak said. But number two, there's so much civic engagement going on in these states that we really don't have here. Actually, Wisconsin, I think the last election, they hit 68% at the statewide level.
What are they doing?
Pardon?
What are they doing?
Well,
that gets
they're having meetings. They have these town-like meetings. They have actual competitive races. One state that I'm particularly fond of, and I never thought I would agree with this, but Oregon has had since 2001 has had mail-only elections. All ballots have to be mailed in. You can either drop them in a ballot box that are located all over the states, or you could put a stamp on it and mail it. And it's sent to you about 2.5 weeks before the election. And you have that time then to discuss it. Some people say, hey, you're taking away the civic engagement because you're not standing in line at an election polling place and able to chat with your neighbor. But they have town meetings. They meet in churches and synagogues. They have block parties to talk about the elections. And they average close to 60% statewide on their elections. It's really amazing.
I don't know what the statistics are for the younger, but I do feel like, at least in our own community, I've seen younger people running for office. I've seen younger people even getting more involved in the community of Erie. Ben, with the Erie Reader magazine, you've got to be able to see some of that. We've had younger people now seem to get and want to get involved.
We do see that, and I think there are 3 clear examples of that. We use city, county council, and in the state level with Ryan Bizzarro. So with city council, you have Bob Mursky, who's a young person, very involved. You have Jay Brenneman on county council, very involved. And then you have Ryan Bizzarro at the state level in the House, very involved. I think one of the things, and Lisa mentioned this earlier, was social media, just using that tool. And I don't think that we see some more mature politicians using that or believing in it, believing that that's actually a good tool to get people activated, get people engaged in what it is that their message it truly isn't to get out there. So I think that younger people are taking the initiative to say they're going to go after their own ilk, younger people who will vote. Let's mobilize them in a different way. Let's use the tools that we have, and that makes for good candidates. And they seem to be open in terms of listening more to their populace, in that they want feedback, they want to hear engagement, they want to know what people are thinking while they're in office so that they can continue to make a difference.
As an observer, well, actually, WICU and WSEE have been involved with Erie Reader in their downtown debate series, and it's great to see these younger people engaged in trying to get the candidates to debate on, they'll target a couple of races before the election. But I'm always disappointed in the turnout for those events, that more people don't come out and attend that. But I will say, these younger voters, or these guys that are trying to engage younger voters, seem to be doing it around certain issues that they think people their age would be interested in, whether it has to do with downtown development or bayfront development, kind of targeted on that.
I think, too, the importance of trying to provide a broad spectrum of coverage is crucial, because not every 25-year-old is free on a Tuesday at 7. They may have another commitment, or they may be working a second shift, or they may be still in school, or something like that. So when we host the debate series, we always make sure we live tweet that. We have a follow-up that immediately goes on our website after that. And we provide coverage in our print magazine as well. So we try to cover as many avenues as possible, so that if somebody can't be there in person to see the debate, they can just go to Twitter and scroll back through and see what the questions were, what the answers were, see a write-up afterwards on our website, and still feel like they're part of the process.
Well, that speaks again to the ballot by mail ballots. Instead of, we do so much to get people registered. We make it so easy for people to register. When you get your driver's license renewal, you can register. You can do all those things to get registered, and we have tons of registered voters, but they're not voting. Instead, we set up barriers, by setting up these 12-hour time on one particular day. We have these, some parties that decided that they were going to have voter ID laws, which are getting turned down all over the country, or getting ruled unconstitutional all over the country. But that was another barrier for minorities or for poor people for elections. Instead of we're not taking down the barrier.
I never looked at it that way. I guess I looked at it more as protecting your vote, that when you show up at the poll, you want to go, this is who I am, and I'm the person casting my vote.
Yeah.
So I had a hard time understanding how that became characterized so much as trying to be a barrier to...
It is, there has never been a voter fraud issue in this state that I'm aware of, and even in Oregon, which I use this, I think for the ballots, they've had 15 million voters in the last 14 years that is mail-only ballots, and they've had only 9 cases of actually prosecuted mail or voter fraud. And
you know, on that, I think 40% of they had a 40% increase in young voters when they went to voting by mail in Oregon. And the motor voter law, which allowed people to register to vote when they got their driver's license, actually added 12 million young people to brought them to the polls.
Well, and that was my next question. I mean, it's you've got to be registered to vote, and I think that is something that needs to be looked at in addition to how do you get the people to the polls, how do you get them to register?
Not only register, but understand what that means. I've had people who are registered independent tell me I can only vote in the presidential elections. They don't realize they can vote every year in November. They just cannot vote in the primaries, which is another thing we could do. Some states have open primaries. You can go in on primary day and say, I want to be a Republican in this election. I want to be a Democrat in this election. And you can actually vote, because so many of our elections here in our community, particularly on the local level, are decided in the primary. By the time the general comes along, the vote has already pretty much been cast.
Well, and I think that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Our Hispanic population is growing in the Erie area, and I read some statistics nationally that Hispanic voters are not engaged. And I don't know whether it, again, is an issue of access or education about the voting process. Are you doing anything to engage Hispanic voters in our community?
Well, I think not only Hispanics, but all ethnicities. We have a lot of new Americans, a lot of people who've moved here from other countries have become citizens, and some of them are very engaged because they didn't have any right to vote where they lived before, and this is the first time. But for many others, it's maybe just harder to reach them. When you talk about the voter ID, if they do not have a driver's license, then what do they use for an ID? That's a question. And young people, they may have a high school or a college ID, but will they accept that as a proof of identification? In Texas, they don't. So I think those are the kind of things we need to get past, those kind of barriers, and try to make it accessible to more people.
I think there's one state, I think it's, don't quote me on this, but I think it's New Hampshire, and they were the first state in the country that had same-day registration, meaning you can go to the polls, and actually, if you weren't registered, you can register right there before you vote, right before you voted. That was taking down another barrier or two. I'd always like people finally are determined, maybe they were living in a cave, I don't know, but they did. Election is today, I'm not registered. They could go and they could register. And it's safe for them to vote. And they haven't had a problem.
Yeah, at the TV station, we get calls on election day of people saying, I don't know where my polling place is. And so it is really amazing. It would be cool if there was an app for that to check, am I registered? Where's my polling place? That would be pretty neat. And look at how many people call in and vote on their phones for Dancing with the Stars or some of these other programs where they engage because it's so easy to engage.
We have the technology.
Online voting is, I think, the next place that people are going to be looking. But there is obviously security issues with that. But if we can use our credit cards and we can vote in many other ways online, you think that we could find the way to allow online voting. I think that would engage voters in greater numbers because of the ease.
In Oregon, and I hate to keep coming back to that, but every envelope that gets sent out has a barcode on it. So that is checked when it comes back. Every signature is verified digitally when it's counted. There are cameras in I mean, it was really fun reading up on this. There are cameras in the counting rooms, actually, so everything is monitored.
Right, but who in your house is grabbing that envelope if there's a disparity in your household? I mean, that's an interesting point of view about that too. The early voting issue is something that's bubbled up in a lot of different states, and I really don't know where that began and what started it. I think it's because in some states the lines are so long at the polling places that people are concerned they won't get the chance to vote. But I'd be interested in hearing what Mrs. Dahlkemper has to say about this. I sort of feel like as the civic discussion goes on, if I were a candidate, I would want the voter to hear everything I had to say, respond to every issue that comes up right up until Election Day, and then be able to make their decision that day. If they weighed in 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, a month before, things change quickly in the cycle of news, and something might come out that would make a voter want to change their mind. So I'm not sure why this early voting thing has gotten
I think
launched.
Early voting is great in a lot of ways because people's lives are busy. People have their jobs, maybe they're working 12 hours and the polls are only open here 13 hours, and so it's difficult to get to the poll. If you're a young person, getting up and going at 7 in the morning may be difficult, and getting there before 8. If you're working late, it becomes impossible. So I think that early voting is something we should look at in Pennsylvania. It works in many other states, but it's not been seen to be the huge driver for increasing voting participation that we see with some of these other things. Honestly, as Jeff has talked about, voting by mail has really been one of the most promising ways we've seen to increase the participation.
We're talking about barriers a lot in what prohibits people from getting to the polls or casting their vote, but I want to bring it back to the idea of just apathy. You know, do we have quality candidates? Maybe is that a reason? If we're lower than the state and we're lower than the nation in terms of our voter turnout, does that not speak to those who are running for elected office? Or are they in some way failing to get their messages out? They're not as attractive as other candidates? People only turn out when there's a vote for governor or there's a vote for president?
Well, I think the apathy is a big issue. I taught a class for a couple of years up at Penn State Barron with Charles Brock. It was called Mega Issues for America. And in that, we went through all the different issues that we hear about, whether we're talking about drug addiction or guns or abortion or all sorts of issues, all the issues that you can talk about on an election. And the young people became very engaged. And we had a number of people in our class tell us they hadn't been registered to vote or they weren't going to vote, but now they were. So I think the civic engagement is important. But I do think, going back to the candidate piece, Ben, is that it is difficult for people to finally say, yes, I will run. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. I think if you've never run for office or you've never worked on a campaign, you do not realize the toll it takes and the time, effort, and resources. So I always encourage people to run, and if not to run, at least at some point in their life, to volunteer for somebody's campaign, somebody that they believe in. And it gives you a different perspective of what this means.
Do you think money wins out sometimes and sometimes shouldn't? I mean, if the candidate ends up with a lot of money or comes from a lot of money or can dump a lot of money into their campaign, does that win the election?
I think money makes a big difference, particularly on the bigger elections, presidential, the gubernatorial, the congressional. When it comes to the local elections, I think a lot of it is grassroots. Do people know who you are? Have they touched you? Have they shook your hand? Do they have a connection with you as the candidate? And so the grassroots efforts are very effective, I think, on the local level.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the very first things you said, Mrs. Dahlkemper, was are people wondering, will my vote make a difference? And, you know, in some cases you were talking about there not even being an opponent on the ballot. But I think the question after that is governance, and people really wondering, regardless of who I put in office, will my lot in life change at all? And I think part of that maybe has been the gridlock going on in Washington, which you certainly saw up close and personal.
And I think when that happens on a state or a federal level, it trickles down to even local elections. That people do begin to think all government is dysfunctional, all government is gridlocked. And there's a lot of great things going on the local level. And so people, the perception is not really true, but it happens because what they see in a broader spectrum is this Congress who cannot get together and find common ground.
Well, you saw what David Kozak said about no more political machines. And the political machines got the vote out. Mm-hmm. And they got the vote out because there was patronage involved. This was before there were government unions and teacher unions. and you had to live in the community that, to get that passionate job, you had to actually live in that community. So you had to vote for that person who was going to give you that job as well. And you also got your neighbors to go out and vote too, because that was going to help you get that job. None of that exists any longer. There's no incentive there for that get out the vote effort to go on, unless it was something like we saw in 2008 at the national level with President Obama and what he was able to do, and through social media and some other sources as well. But that only lasted like one election cycle. It didn't carry over as everybody hoped that it would. But that's another reason too for that not get out the vote.
Well, and he also Dr. Kozak also talked about stronger political parties. And I don't know whether or not, I just know that Erie is more of a Democratic town, and so it tends to sway into that issue. But I don't know how you make the political parties any stronger, and that may be who backs you, and who leads the parties, and how they get the vote out. And I don't know whether or not that would also make a difference here in Erie County.
I think we've made some great strides here. I will say on the Democratic side, we've led the state, or been one of the leading counties in the state for voter touches. And that's number of people called, number of doors knocked on, whether we're talking in the last election for presidential or even in the last election last year. So we're doing a good job, but again, we don't have the machines like we used to.
Right. And then south of Interstate 90, it changes drastically the party makeup. Then you're looking at a lot more Republicans, and you can actually follow that on the charts of the vote especially the presidential elections.
Well, we have had awesome conversation. We surprise each other, I think, sometimes with the spirited conversations we have, but unfortunately, we are out of time for this portion of our program. I want to thank the members of today's panel. We hope that we have inspired you to get involved, get out and vote, get more involved in the local elections and the voting process. So we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will switch gears and talk about another important component of today's program, and that is community volunteerism. You're watching Erie Now. Thank you for joining us for the second half of our program, Erie Now. I'm Cindy Patton. According to Erie Vital Signs, the national volunteer rate has risen, but the rates right here in Erie County are still below those in Pennsylvania and in the nation. To give us a closer look at this issue in our community, we spoke with Daryl Craig, a member of the Erie Bluecoats, whose objective is to work to reduce violence in Erie. As a volunteer himself, Daryl talked about the importance of volunteering and the positive impact it has on a community.
Through volunteer work, it shows a commitment, it shows a passion, it shows a determination, because it's easy to point a finger at a problem, but it's another thing when you decide that absence of recognition, money, any fame or any glory, you're going to decide to participate in the changing and the betterment of whatever that issue is. And volunteerism is such a rewarding way to live, because I firmly, personally believe that you attract to yourself what's in you. As you sow, so shall you reap. Some of these kids, you talk to him this morning, he could be dead tonight. And so you don't have time you have to take the opportunity that God has blessed you with, and you have to try to make that serious impact and open that child up to the possibility that, yeah, I can do better. And yeah, it will get better for me, and it can get better for me. I don't know any other way to live. I would not change my life for anything in the world, and I can seriously say that the condition of my life as a result of volunteerism is pure heaven, even on the worst day.
Now here's a look at our panel for this portion of the program. Bob Wooler is the executive director of the Nonprofit Partnership in Erie, which is a membership-based organization that provides education, training, and tools to strengthen our nonprofit agencies. Erie County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper also joins us once again for this portion of the program. And two journalists bringing their expertise to the subject of community volunteerism, Lisa Adams, reporter and anchor for Lilly Broadcasting, and Jeff Pinsky, retired journalist from the Erie Times and Edinburgh University. Bob, I think we should start with you. I'm sure from your perspective from the nonprofit organizations, I bet you'd like a room full of Daryl Craigs, but how do you get people to have that passion that he has? What do you think it takes, or why is it so important for volunteerism in this community?
Well, I think people naturally want to be involved in their communities. I mean, we have another thing that Erie Vital Signs shows is that we have a high degree of social capital here in Erie County. So people are naturally want to connect with each other. They're involved in a lot of organizations already. So one of the things that we think is important around volunteerism is it builds and sustains a high quality of life here in the region, and it helps stretch a challenged workforce in the nonprofit and charitable sector. I think everybody knows that there's less money available these days, and organizations are struggling to find ways to sustain the level of services to try to meet community problems. Volunteerism is a natural way to do that. We have a lot of folks who want to connect with each other, want to make their communities better. So it's really a question of linking up those two things and trying to make it work.
Brother D, Daryl Craig, I've had a chance to work with him a little bit on what the Bluecoats were doing and do some news stories about that, but he clearly has a passion for getting into relationships with these students coming to and from school. And it's fascinating because they're actually growing other volunteers out of high school kids that they have helped stay out of trouble, have turned around and become Bluecoats themselves. But not everybody can be in the trenches or has the gifts or skills to do the kind of work that he's doing. What's being done locally to help people know how to connect with a volunteer opportunity and know what their skill set is and where they could put it to use?
Well, one of the things the Nonprofit Partnership has done in recent years, we started an online portal, Get Connected Erie, with United Way. So it's a chance for folks to go online. People who want to volunteer can register based on their interests, kind of declare, the kinds of areas that they'd like to get involved in. And organizations who want to receive volunteers can go post their needs and put a profile up there, what they do, what kind of services they provide. And then the two serve a matching function. So through that, just this year, in 2014, we've had over 2,000 individuals in the region register and go online and try to look for opportunities. And our work indicates that about 40 to 50% are probably finding meaningful things to do based on the 125 or so nonprofit profiles that are up there. So that's one thing that's helping to kind of post the needs, post the interests, and match those up out there in the community and get more people involved.
But despite your 2,000, though, the statistics seem to indicate that volunteerism is down in Erie County. How do you reconcile that?
Well, one of the things that I think is true about volunteerism is that the busiest people are the ones that volunteer the most. This is what you find across the country, basically. It's the people who are working and already involved and serving on boards and those kinds of things, and they're just doing more because connection breeds other connection. So one of the realities about Erie is people work a lot in Erie. The people who are working work a lot because of the wage structure here. We have lower wages than a lot of other places. That's one thing that we've probably talked about through this program, and Erie Vital Signs certainly shows. And to the extent you work maybe multiple jobs or more hours to make ends meet, you don't have that time available to volunteer. So I think that's one reality.
What would the commitment then be? How do you get people to see that maybe you don't have to commit so many of your discretionary hours, and it could be just a couple hours a month or less than that? I think the commitment maybe scares some folks away.
Clearly, and volunteerism comes in all shapes and sizes, from the big mass volunteer one-day events where folks are, it's over and done in one day and you've done the job that the crowd is turning out to do. Or a lot of folks, including Brother D and the Blue Coats, they like the ongoing relationship building, day in and day out, week in and week out kind of involvement that's steady. We certainly have a lot of older workers, retired folks here, folks who are rooted in the region, have been involved in their communities for many years and want to continue to give and be connected. One of the challenges is to try to figure out a skill set and a match that's right for them, so we get them to the right organization where there can be some secure ongoing involvement. That would be great if we could do more of that.
Kathy, from the perspective as an Erie County executive, and I think, Bob, you had pointed to the fact that, funds are limited. Mm-hmm. How important, or where do you see the impact in the county as increasing volunteerism?
Well, certainly the county, part of what we do is take care of those who are in the most need in our community. So anytime that volunteers can assist these great social service agencies that we have, the county contracts with a lot of them, but anytime they can get volunteers, it stretches their resources. Instead of having to add more personnel, they can use volunteers to do a number of things that their agency does. Obviously not direct care if we're talking something like mental health, but they can do some of the other ancillary things. And I think what it does also, and I think this is so key for our community as a whole, is when you volunteer, it puts you in touch with people you may not otherwise socialize with. Somebody who's different than you, somebody who lives in a different part of the community than you. We are a divided community in different ways. We're urban and we're rural. We have the east-west divide, the state line, or State Street, where I live, on which side. We have a religious divide. Am I Catholic? Am I Christian? Am I Jewish? Am I whatever? And we divide that way. And then there's also the racial and ethnicity divides that we see in our community. So when you do volunteer for many of these groups, not only are you helping them extend their resources, but I think more importantly, you're making connections with people and groups that you might not otherwise make connections with. And then I think we begin to see each other in a different way, and it helps us with so many different issues.
I was intrigued by Brother D. I didn't know that was his name. This is the first time I've really seen him.
Well, they were kind of, if you're not a school student, you might not see them.
Okay.
But they do. They really started with Pastor Gaines, and they wear these blue jackets, and that really started because one of the kids said, "Oh, you're the blue coat dudes," and it started with a school kid kind of giving them their name. I mean, they had jackets that said on the back "Nonviolence Initiative," but they agree to be at schools when kids are coming to school in the morning and when they're coming out in the afternoon, and sometimes I think they're even there at lunchtime in the cafeteria. So some of these things that turn into violent acts, they bubble up with little tiffs going on between kids, and sometimes they can hear that happening. They can pull somebody aside and say, "Don't do that, head home." But it is a relationship building thing and kind of keeping the ear to the ground.
And I wonder if there's been any impact on that. I mean, as we go in and we volunteer for something that obviously we have a passion for. And with violence taking over in areas of the city, and it just seems to be difficult to get a handle on, because it does start with this small something and then it builds into, and how can volunteerism, or how can something like the Blue Coats have an impact perhaps on something as difficult as violence in our community?
I think one of the things we're seeing is there's some great success when a caring adult is attaching themselves to a child, or a child sees a caring adult in their life. And Grad Nation is an effort that's happening here soon in our community, where they're trying to connect adults who want to help change these issues of violence, students dropping out of school, young people getting involved in drugs and alcohol. And so having a caring adult in numerous ways can help change that child's life.
I wanted to ask Bob about this. As reporters, we have almost every weekend, there's a charitable walk in our community. And while that's volunteerism of a certain form, and I certainly know that many of these organizations rely on these walks to raise money, is that the best way to volunteer, or would some of these organizations rather have the manpower or the woman power of somebody rather than them taking a walk and writing a check?
Well, I'm sure a lot of them do. And I think one of the challenges facing the nonprofit community is sustaining the people power within the organization to engage volunteers at higher skill levels and for longer term kinds of things. Now, a walk or a one-day event is certainly an opportunity to meet somebody and establish some initial acquaintance and some kind of bond with that mission of that organization. But what they really need, and what we're trying to challenge, and since our work is to build capacity for them to sustain volunteerism, we're trying to figure out ways where they can recruit more, get them involved in the life of their organization, and sustain them. A lot of these, volunteers who come out for one-day events or for a short-term kind of thing don't find that they're engaged in the organization because they don't have the ongoing support there. And I think it speaks to how nonprofits are stretched these days, and you have a single administrator or two administrators coping with everything in the organization, raising the money, managing the people, supervising all the programs, doing the public relations, everything that it takes to keep an organization going, you have spread amongst too few people. Volunteerism and maintaining that and sustaining volunteers and engaging them doesn't get high enough on their priority list. So it's one of the challenges in the sector that we have to try to step up and manage a little bit better. Because the will is there in our community. Folks want to volunteer, they want to connect and want to make a difference, and probably want to be involved at higher skill levels and for longer periods of time. If only we equip the organizations to help them do it better.
The churches seem to be doing a good job at that. We see this, whether it's out, you're covering stories, or they're building playgrounds. There's the therapy dogs that are going into the nursing homes. The service organizations seem to be doing a good job. But if you go into the service organizations, you seem to see a lot of people whose hair is the color of mine, and not a lot of younger folks getting involved. So it goes back to that same thing that Lisa was talking about, getting the younger folks engaged in this.
That is a good question, though, because I have to say, I mean, high school kids today seem a lot more engaged in volunteering than when I was in school. So I'm curious about that. Is there a youth movement? I mean, I know there are mission trips and school work trips and so on. I don't think we really did that back when I was in high school.
Well, I think there are a lot of different things going on. I mean, Erie Together, you have a volunteerism component trying to sustain that with their outreach to organizations and trying to involve youth in more service kinds of activities related to the courses they're taking in school. Career Street Erie, while it's an effort nominally to expose them to careers, one of the ways that students find out about doing that is through volunteering. So we're trying to boost that through Get Connected also, in partnership with Career Street and the schools to try to give students more avenues to get out there. And again, it comes back to the nonprofits and figuring out ways to engage them with appropriate skills so that students are doing some authentic work. They're not just cleaning a room or painting a wall or raking a yard or something like that, but they're doing work that's appropriate to their skills and interests and opening up that career avenue for some exploration that could pay off in the long term.
I think the professional experience that young people can gain in volunteerism, as you're talking about, is so important. And not only young people, but people of all ages. You get exposed to different career paths, but you also grow professionally and personally. And one of the things that people ask me about is, what if I want to run for office someday, what should I do? And I always tell them volunteer. I was amazed when I first ran for office how many people I knew because of all the volunteer work that I had done over a number of years. And it does connect you with the community in a different way. And kind of going back to the earlier segment, people who volunteer are much more likely to vote. So you're civically engaged because you know what's going on in your community and you know the changes that need to happen.
But I think that has also made a huge difference on college applications. And I think that volunteerism also makes a huge difference. I just know even from both of my kids when they were going for a job and their first job. I think that people, what is your leg up? What makes you that much better than somebody else who went to your college and maybe has your degree? And if you show some interest in the community in which you were living, I think that does give you a leg up.
Well, you see a lot of our corporations, Erie Insurance, GE being two of them, two of our largest companies here in our community who do a lot of volunteerism in-house and out. They let their employees go out and take a day and volunteer at many of the different organizations in our community.
Yeah, and that is a big trend in corporate involvement in communities these days, is, you know, empowering their employees to be actively involved and sometimes sanctioning that in the policies of their company so that it's paid time. It isn't just something that's encouraged, it's something that's rewarded. And so that's a good thing.
Well, and I also like the idea that you had brought up that you have to make it a meaningful experience and it can't be a one-time thing. It can become a more meaningful experience if you go beyond the painting of the wall that one day or get a little bit more involved in something that you feel some really relationship with volunteering. But you also, makes you feel good for that one day that you went to Presque Isle and cleaned up. But you need to have something that maybe will help your skill set. Or that you can bring your skill set to.
One of the positive things, and we have, you know, retirees, you know, it happens every day in every community, but it's certainly happening here in this area. And so some who are approaching retirement are reaching out to us because they want to sustain their momentum. They don't want to kind of fall into that trap of inactivity, which can lead to disengagement from the communities. Because as we said, connection breeds connection. So folks will reach out to us as they're nearing retirement and just saying, look, these are my interests, this is what I'd like to do, can you hook me up? So, because they want to just seamlessly glide into a situation where they're continuing to be involved and continuing to give and using their skills in their community. It's great.
And I think that's an important aspect of what should people do. So if anybody's listening right now and thinks, you know what, I really would like to get up, but I don't even know where to go. I don't know where to go. Do I call the individual? Do I call St. Vincent and say, do you need a volunteer? Or do I call the county and say, do you need a how can people know? And is this your organization? How do you hook people up? What do you do?
Well, the Get Connected Erie website is probably the best single place to go for sort of an overview of who's doing what, who has what to offer, and you can see that at getconnectederie.org. So that's sort of a good first place. And then, you know, by finding an organization there that seems to be offering the kinds of things that you like to do, pursuing that opportunity, if there's one posted there, getting in touch with that organization directly and having a conversation, maybe requesting an interview to investigate future possibilities. Those are all good things. Or sometimes people know, or from their past experience, have been involved with another organization and they want to rekindle that connection. Well, that's great too. Just reach out to that organization directly.
And I think
The newspaper used to publish an entire page once a week on how to volunteer and where to volunteer and what organizations actually needed volunteers. And I haven't seen that in a while.
It's still around, but it's more episodic. It's not as regular as it used to be, but it's still published.
And I think that was just another way of getting into, just another tool of getting folks into that as well, at least newspaper readers.
And I think there's a responsibility on the organization's part also. Because if you have a passion and you call that organization and you say, I want to volunteer, hopefully the organization will respond and say, yes, we need you, because there is some disappointment amongst some people who wanted to do that and didn't find the opportunity.
Well, we've had another great discussion. Once again, we are out of time. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for bringing their insight into the topic of volunteerism in our community. We will be right back. We'll do a little mini discussion with our journalists to highlight some of the aspects of today's programs. You are watching Erie Now. Welcome back. We're back for a quick discussion on today's topics, voting and volunteerism. We have Lily's Broadcasting Lisa Adams, Erie Reader's Ben Spagan, and the retired journalist Jeff Pinsky. We have this portion of the program because we all have a tendency to really talk a lot about what happened. And so, Ben, you were going to start us off with a perspective?
One of the things that I think Erie often seems to be categorized as, a college city, a truck stop of sorts, of where we have this young population coming in, staying here for 4 to 5, maybe 6 years, and then leaving. And I think that maybe coupling volunteerism and voting, we would see that if, maybe there's greater outreach at the collegiate level, the colleges are more involved. Lisa had brought up that the youth certainly seem to be doing more volunteer trips. If maybe we capitalize on that, volunteerism begets civic engagement, and then that begets people being interested in the voting process, and that in turn ends up being brain gain, where we have people sticking around. Mm-hmm. So maybe it all starts with volunteerism and informing people about their own community.
Joseph Coomer, who was the youth pastor for my kids growing up, would take kids on a big mission trip, sometimes that would be out of the country. They did some mission trips to Jamaica, or maybe they went to other parts of the country after Hurricane Katrina to do some volunteerism. But then he always alternated that with a local mission trip. And I think my kids were just as moved, if not more moved, by doing something at the city mission, or seeing something that was going on in their own community. So you don't have to have a big exotic trip to do mission somewhere else. It's really right in your backyard. And to your point, I think when people are engaged, they do want to stay in the community. They feel connected. We have a lot of turnover in young reporters. It's kind of the nature of the business. But the ones who are happiest while they're here are the ones who really do get involved in the community.
Well, I think one of the things that research points to is that millennials care about broader issues. The millennial generation looks at the issue of poverty. They look at the issue of climate change. They look at the issues of violence. And I think sometimes we tend to think more broader picture of where in the world can we go, because we're so globalized now that the world is smaller than ever, and that we can get to these places and help elsewhere. And we lose sight that poverty exists right here in Erie, and that's how perhaps we could take these broader issues and look at them through an Erie lens and get people more involved here. And then again, once they care more about their community, they do want to stick around and make it a better place.
I think that when you get 3 journalists together, you're going to come out with 4 or 5 opinions, different ones there. So it's not that I disagree with you, Ben, or with you, Lisa. But I feel that it sounds good on paper and in theory, and doesn't translate to actual practicum to work that way. When you talked about your children and with the city mission and such, your children have engaged parents, okay? And that is so important, and you don't see this often enough, at least in the community and the center city, and that's where we're talking about the violence that goes on, and it's a whole other subject. But without the engaged parents, without the engaged community, voting is involved, civic engagement is involved, in volunteerism, all that is involved. So what you're saying sounds good to me on paper, but I don't think it works without.
I do think that you do need the adult supervision. Yes, it would be great if it were your parents that were helping you and helping to guide you. But you have people like Brother D. You have people like Sonia Arrington, who have gone out there and really pounded the pavement and done the grassroots efforts to try in their small community, in their section of the city of Erie, where there really has been trouble. So I do think that it does take some parental guidance and some adult that can help to guide and to at least focus somebody into a passion that they can be involved. But I think the colleges do need to get involved, and I think they have. I really do.
I'll take it back to an example. Personally, for me, I went to Gannon, so I participated in Give Day, Gannon's invitation to volunteer everywhere. And I'd certainly visited Presque Isle before, but when you're out there actually doing work and picking up trash, you feel a level of ownership to that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, we're talking about these one-day events of you do 8 hours worth of volunteering, but I think there is a lasting effect to that of now you look at a place differently because you've seen it differently. You're not there as a tourist or a visitor, but you're there as someone trying to make it better. And I think that those are good things that colleges are doing, and we should really capitalize on that and make sure people are aware that these things are happening and encourage it more.
I agree, and I think right here at WQLN, I know that volunteerism is something that they're really very involved with, and you see Tom New, you see him everywhere. And he used to grab the kids from Fairview, his 2 children, and really that built a lot of what it is that they're doing, and his daughter Alexa has made it her career. But I mean, I do think that it takes our village. It does.
Yeah.
It takes.
No, well, absolutely, and as I said before, that the volunteerism and the voting turnout and getting out to vote are linked by common denominators, and it's removing the barriers, so making it easier for volunteers to get involved and make it easier for people to vote.
I think bringing back to voting, we talked about both barriers and apathy, and I know I brought up apathy a couple of times. I don't know, I can't help but think that, the fact that we don't have multiple candidates running for these positions, that speaks to a larger issue. I don't know what that issue is, perhaps, but when we have these offices that are in charge of the city, in charge of the county, and we only have 1, maybe 2 people running for that, and what's wrong with our system?
Well, and what I talked to Kathy about before she had left, it takes a lot to run for an office, and the salary isn't necessarily there. You've just completed college, you're going to go ahead and run for office, and that job is going to pay you more, and then this one's going to cost you. So you've got to have the backing of whatever political party. They've got to be able to help to guide you and to fund you, and at the same time, you can't work while you're running. And so I think that's so difficult.
There's the advantage of incumbency, can't be understated or overstated.
Absolutely.
Because once that incumbent gets in there, it's like they're in there.
That's right.
Unless there are term limits, than there are in some city and county offices now.
I think the pay thing is a good idea. Sorry, Lisa. A good thing to mention too, because just recently we raised the mayor's salary from $65,000 to $95,000, I believe, and there was a lot of outrage over that big of a raise for the mayor. But to think that somebody in charge of a city, a large city, is only making $65,000 a year is mind blowing.
And if you looked at the hourly rate, truly, of the amount of hours that the mayor or the county executive or the state representative, sure, there are some downtimes, but really you are supposed to be where everybody expects you to be.
Job.
And it is a 24/7 job. And I think that's hard. I really do.
I think some kind of a peer-to-peer ad campaign or some kind of a clever educational campaign about registering to vote, where your polling place is, just some practical information. If you live in this area, you can only vote for these races, or in the primary, this is how it works. Because I think people are embarrassed by what they don't know. And I think educating them about the election process might make it easier for people to jump in.
But if you look at all of the teeny tiny little communities that we have, and we have one newspaper who's not going to take the time to speak about Elgin, and where you're going to vote there, or Mill Village, or Albion, or Fairview. It's hard.
But an ad that would direct them to the county's website that has all that information.
True.
I think that, we see national campaigns working. I mean, think about Rock the Vote, where we have musicians, celebrities encouraging young people to get out and vote. But again, that's on a national level. Go vote for your president. Perhaps Erie needs a campaign to say, go vote for your councilman. Go vote for your state representative. That we need to see that kind of initiative here on a local level to get people excited, because local government's what affects our day-to-day the most.
Well, but it doesn't have, those national campaigns to rock the vote, they don't have the staying power. We need something that has the staying power like that civic engagement gave previous generations, that they considered this an almost sacred duty, that people fought for this right to vote.
You are correct.
For 200 years, that women fought for this right to have that vote, that minorities who are now still being put down through the voter ID and the photographs, that are still fighting, whether you agree with it or not, they're still fighting for that. You need to have that staying power that goes beyond rock the vote.
I would argue that it has the staying power. It's back again. People are using it. People are using different means. We saw that the most retweeted thing on Twitter was 4 more years. That people were plugged into that. People were, that nearly crashed Twitter when that happened. So I would argue that there is that staying power, and I think that's part of the youth movement being evolved and using new tools that are available to them that weren't available 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago.
I hope you're right.
I hope so too. And this again has been an enlightening conversation. I am Cindy Patton. You have been watching Erie Now. We hope that we have been able to inform you a little bit more on what is trending in our community and what may be needed to make some improvements here. Thank you again to all of our guests. And if you'd like to learn more about Erie Vital Signs, you can check out the website. It is erievitalsigns.org. You can also like them on Facebook or follow them on Twitter at Erie Vital Signs and use hashtag ErieNow. I'm Cindy Patton. Take care.